Hey everyone, I wanted to offer you guys a quick video this week and follow up on a few of the details that I talked about in the article that I just pushed out on Tuesday, which is talking about our hormones, but also just kind of the environment. And some of the things, I just thought I would jump and do a quick video because the explanation is sometimes droll. And so I think sometimes just kind of talking about it is a little bit better. So I talked a lot about we think about like gluten-free products and our thyroid and how the thyroid regulates our metabolism, and one of the main issues that we face with menopause or moving into this phase is weight gain or weight shifts, or just where our body is laying down fat in the body, and it's very different. Our metabolism slows down. That's how it goes. There are definitely things that we can do to help keep it moving, but it's going to slow down slower than it was before. And so what are those things and how do we approach this? So one of the common questions that I get is like, should I be eating gluten, eating gluten, and not just related to menopause, but just a whole host of different reasons. And so if you haven't heard me talk about this before, what I pretty much try to explain is that our source of wheat in the US, which is where gluten comes from, right? The gluten is the main protein in wheat, comes from wheat. And our wheat crops in the US didn't start out with us meant to eat crops that were sprayed with Roundup. But because of cross-contamination and use of equipment and processing, this trace chemical does get on all of the wheat. And I believe that it is combined with that gluten molecule. And there's a lot of research to show that this is, typically part of the problem is that we have a lot of pesticides and things that wind up in the food supply that were never meant to wind up in the food supply. And so if you test them, they're in trace amounts, and they're probably not very harmful if you eat it once or twice. But the issue is, because we have an increasing amount of processed foods that we eat in our current day, I kind of flash back to my mom always saying like, oh, you get so crazy about, the smallest detail. And it's because, back in the 70s and the 80s when I was growing up and my mother was feeding me, there weren't as many processed foods. There weren't as many chemicals in general. We hadn't invented them all yet, right? So we hadn't widespread them. We didn't rely as much on fast foods, dining out of the home. So even if we had some of them, our exposure was a lot less than it is now. Some of us more than others for sure, but no matter what, back in the 70s and 80s, the exposure to these toxins were a lot less. Now we've got food chains and restaurants and things that are buying, not purposely, like that's good business, right? Like, hey, we can source our flour from this place, it's a lot cheaper. We're not going to import our flour from France, right? So that's expensive. So we can't offer our customers a value if we're doing things like that. So none of it is on purpose. It's just this perfect storm of how things got pushed forward, and we're missing some regulations here, and that could be lobbyists and money and all of that stuff, and that's a whole other presentation. What we want to understand is our exposure to these pesticides and toxins is a lot more and a lot more frequently just because we're eating more processed foods in general. So we're accumulating this glyphosates that have been sprayed, the Roundup chemical that have been sprayed to make the plants bug resistant, so that we don't lose the crops, right? Also, not intentional for a health issue, but to get the bugs so that the crops are not destroyed. So our responsibility as consumers, in part, is to understand what we're eating. That's the part that I can affect as best I can. I try to be loud and say, hey, companies, please don't do this anymore. Maybe that's in my next decade of life. We'll take that on. But for right now, I want to educate my clients and my individuals on what are we eating and what are we not eating. So be very mindful of wheat products that you buy that are in the US. If you do like products, like if you have celiac disease, that is a marker for gluten. You're probably you're gonna have some issues no matter where you get your gluten from, because it's looking at gluten. Other gluten sensitivities are often because the gluten and this glyphosate have interfaced, and that molecule looks really, in our bodies see that as a toxin, and that molecule looks really similar to the molecules that make up your thyroid gland. So gluten and the thyroid gland are pretty close. Now we've got this glyphosate on there as well. So with celiac and with other gluten sensitivities, we see a dysregulation in the thyroid because the body is confused and it starts to attack the thyroid, which causes a dysregulation. So what do we do about that? Well, we can avoid gluten altogether because, truth be told, we don't need it. We don't need it to survive. We can eat our nutrients. Some of you may have heard me say this before. About 15 years ago, I was at a seminar, and the speaker said, we can exist on, seafood, fruits and vegetables. I was like, this lady's next level. That's insane. And what I have learned over the past 15 years is she's right. So that we can really exist on that. We get everything that we need to nourish our bodies from those foods. Now, there's lots more to food, right? There's enjoyment and celebration and all of those good things. So I hear that as well. So what do we do about gluten? Like I said, you can totally eliminate it. You're not going to miss out on any nutrients that you can't find somewhere else if you do eliminate gluten. Your thyroid will probably be less under attack, and your gut and all of the symptoms related to that are probably going to resolve or feel a little bit better. So there's one option. You could also, anytime you want to choose a wheat product or something containing gluten, have it be sourced from outside of the United States in a country where glyphosates are banned, and they're banned and there's no cross-contamination. So our country doesn't say, yeah, go ahead, put glyphosate in food. We just don't do a great job in making sure that the cross-contamination doesn't happen and that it doesn't wind up in the food supply. So best to source those foods from outside of the country or places where they have tighter regulations around some of these pesticides and toxins so that we don't have that coming on board. I personally find that I can tolerate pasta and breads that are made with flours that have been imported from Italy. For one, that's usually my go-to. And I cannot eat even one slice of bread like made at the local supermarket. I don't feel well at all. It's almost immediate at this point. So be mindful of those things. You can eliminate those or source your products from outside of the US, and do be mindful, products that are not wheat based, right? So you're going to buy bread that's clearly a wheat based product in most scenarios, but wheat and malts and things are also come from wheat. So sometimes sauces and soups and other things have that. So you do have to check those things. You would also want to source from a country that might not have glyphosates. And that might get a little bit expensive. So just be careful and read your labels, and try to decrease your overall intake of processed foods. I try to use these as a backup or like a very once in a while type of thing, because they do contain not just the glyphosates but other toxins that, like I said, when growing up in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have it as part of our culture so frequently as we do now. And I always, tease my kids, and I'm like, you guys can't even make a trip like down the street with like, we gotta pull over for water, and again, as a parent who's grown from the 70s and 80s, we all know how hilarious that is that like you just were like dehydrated and hungry and that was, nobody cared, right? So pendulum swing, I'm not sure either one of those scenarios is spot on, somewhere in the middle. So just be mindful of those things when you're stopping and purchasing foods out of the house. You want to have limited exposure. Your gut is a very delicate thing. It's actually open to the environment, right? We can eat food, goes in the mouth, and that tube all the way through the entire body is that open tube. It is in essence open to the environment. Our mouth is open, taking in things, so we can put all kinds of toxins and things in there, and it's very delicate. It has to extract, it's geared to extract all of the nutrients out of there, and it will extract out the toxins as well and deliver those throughout the body. So be mindful of what you choose. Think about, do you need to include gluten if you're super sensitive or have celiac? You can go without it. Is that an option for you? Or if you want to source it from outside of the country or at a place where they do not have any of these toxins and pesticides anywhere near their food handling machinery. So good luck with that. Hopefully some of this information helps. Sometimes it's easier to talk it through than to just sit down and read an article about blah, 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 glyphosates and that kind of stuff. So enjoy your information. And as always, please let me know if you have any follow-up questions.